Good afternoon. First of all, I wish to thank Eliash for this invitation and also to greet Daniele and Cesar, all of whom I've had the privilege of working with at the Mitchell Institute. And of course, again, Cesar, thank you for the translation of my text, Core Competencies in Relational Psychoanalysis, into the Italian language. I'm deeply honored to have been invited to participate in this online seminar honoring the work of Stephen Mitchell and the celebration of his classic and the republishing of and celebration of his classic work, Hope and Dread in Psychoanalysis. Briefly for your attendance, I'm the founder and executive director of the Contemporary Psychodynamic Institute, former academic dean and professor of psychology at the School of Theology and Psychology, and clinical associate professor at the University of Washington. And as mentioned, I'm the author of Core Competencies in Relational Psychoanalysis, and I have a new text coming out on psychodynamic supervision in a new key to be released in December of 2024. I hope you pick it up because I'm especially going to be interested in how people will take in one of the essays entitled From Interpretation into Complex Dialogue, as I believe it contributes to Mitchell's radical shift in the use of the self of the therapist. I believe this effort that I've done in this book will contribute to how we language relational work that moves us away from interpretation and into what Atlas and Aaron call dramatic dialogues. I can say that my writings may never have happened had I not picked up Mitchell's text years ago. Let me tell you of my first experience with this text and with his work. I live in Seattle, Washington, on the west coast of the United States on the Pacific Ocean, where there are over 400 islands at my doorstep. It was on one of these islands on a weekend retreat that I picked up Mitchell's text, Hope and Dread, and I was blown away by its wisdom, its clarity, and its humanity. It was as wild to me as the waters pounding on the shore next to me. It was a new level of understanding psychoanalysis I had yet to be exposed to. I found his work highly intuitive, full of authenticity, and I recall not being able to put the book down. At the time, the relational movement was just beginning, and I was just beginning my own psychoanalytic journey. At the time, I was immersed in learning object relations theory, and in particular, Melanie Klein's concept of projection. And though I found the term so alive in my work, particularly in struggling with a borderline patient of mine, where I felt literally she placed and projected so many parts of herself, and I felt it literally within my own body. But I felt something else going on, and yet I had no words to explain the phenomenon. What I was feeling was that this projection was not only hers, but that I was also involved in some way, may I dare say, projecting back onto her. I had this felt sense that I was reacting to her demands out of my own experience, and in my fears and anxieties was projecting back onto her that experience. I was beginning to feel like there's something about a two-wayness here, a two-way street. But there was no words yet in the literature that could guide me on what I was experiencing, and I was actually frightened. In fact, the only literature at my disposal was that this was my countertransference and that my subjectivity was getting in the way, and that my only task was to interpret the transference and her projective defense. But I also knew that this effort that I was doing of interpreting, was not getting us anywhere. So you can imagine my excitement when reading Hope and Dread, where Mitchell was writing about the essentialness of working with both and, introducing the concept of intersubjectivity and the use of the therapist's self as the agent of change. Let me read to you what he says on page 78 and page 79. He says, "The analyst is not a mirror, an inert object, but a complex, meaning-generating subjectivity in their own right. The analytic situation, inevitably, he says, represents the encounter of two perspectives, two subjectivities, two psychic realities." And he goes on using and influenced himself by Lou Aaron and says that Aaron argues that a central and necessary feature of the analytic process is the patient's curiosity about, search for, an evolving understanding of the analyst as a person. Part of what every patient needs is the freedom to explore the analyst in a very personal way, including the analyst's relationship to what he knows. Well, I thought this man was a psychoanalytic heretic, and I was secretly very happy to meet him. and his words resonated so much about what I was experiencing clinically. Highlights then from Mitchell's seminal work for me are the first one being the use of the therapist's self as a primary means of conducting an analysis. The analyst not as an objective observer, but analysis as an intersubjective two-person experience. And he says this, the analyst makes his way through his own experience to an understanding of the patient's experience. We find our patients through our own experience, is what he's saying here. It's just a phenomenally wonderful thing. And the complementarity of the interpersonal situation they have collaborated in shaping. He goes on to say, the analyst's personal participation in the data, the analyst's personal impact on the patient's experience that both are struggling to grasp and understand, is no longer seen as contamination of a purer knowledge. The next thing, number 2, in contrast to Freud's idea of the underlying wish to gratify infantile needs, Mitchell reimagined the drive to be a pursuit of contact rather than of gratification. And this became so clear to me with my patient that her projections of dissociated, unwanted aspects of herself were just as much about communicating to me her need to connect with me as they were a defense. The third thing that I appreciated in his phenomenal work was that the concept of the self is not stationary or binary, but is multiple, complex, continuous, and discontinuous. Diagnosing my patient borderline was so limiting and somewhat descriptive, but did not represent the multiplicity, the complexity, the continuousness and discontinuous of a self, and also that I was not just one self myself. In contrast to Freud's idea of conflict between id, ego, and superego, Mitchell brings to us that conflict is envisioned as the clash between contrasting and incompatible self-organizations and self-other relationships. So that developmentally, there is a contrasting issue that seems unable to be worked through. And the push isn't some interpsychic thing only to be worked through, but it's the working through of the historical narrative, the patient, and as it also reveals itself within the analytic dyad. The next thing, the sixth thing, is the radical shift in clinical practice, a move from objective knowledge to systems and constructions embedded within the personal experience and subjectivity of the analytic dyad. Therefore, we as therapists offer ourselves up to be shaped, arranged, rearranged, explored, and to engage directly with us. Outcome then is less about correction, illumination, or renunciation of infantile thought, and more, according to Mitchell, about expansion, reconciliation, and confirmation. We understand our patients less about suffering from conflictual infantile passions that can be tamed and transformed through reason and understanding. We understand them more from a stunted personal and interpersonal development, and that our task is a revitalization of the patient's experience of their self and their self-other organizations. And the hope is that analysis is a psychological space in which genuine desire and hope may become possible. He says the tensions and reconciliations between them, their hopes and their dreads, become the medium of change. Hope and dread in psychoanalysis represents a vision of the analytic process that is both distinctly personal and interpersonal. One of the questions you asked me was, what do you think about Mitchell's, the book, Hope and Dread, and its relevance today? What I can say is I believe Hope and Dread is one of the most relevant texts in its day and remains so today. His works, and particularly Hope and Dread, still reverberate throughout the analytic world, and I see no end to it. Thank you so kindly for this invitation, allowing me to remember with you the power of Mitchell's influence on my life, and may we all continue to value what he brought to us, and value that change comes from our deeply human encounters and not from our distant, objective, often defensive selves. Influenced by Mitchell and the power of change through authentic human encounter, I leave you with the following. Someone once asked me, why do we do this for a living? And I answered, because to us, to do anything else would not be living. For who else is granted the sacred gift of tending to another person's tattered and broken soul? Who else is called as witness to discover the depth and beauty of a person when they or others can no longer see? Who else is called to listen to all that has been left unsaid, seeking voice? And who else is called to become entangled in the story so that a new story can be written? And who else discovers their own soul when they have touched the soul of another? Why do we do this for a living? How can we not? Thank you.